Christopher Dudas Koch moved like a legend between two very different worlds. In the streets, people called him Presi, the Don who kept the lane running and the bills paid. On the other side, in court files and embassy cables, he showed up as something else entirely, a brutal shot caller, a ghost behind kilos, guns, and bodies. In Tivoli Gardens, he was the man you went to when the system failed you. In the United States, he was the Jamaican kingpin they would cross oceans to bring down. That is the split that makes his story so heavy. To one set of eyes, he is a savior. To another, he is pure menace. Join us as we step inside the rise, rule, and downfall of Christopher Dudas Koch, the Jamaican Don who buried enemies and challenged the U.S. government. Christopher Michael Koch was born in Kingston in 1969, the youngest son of Lester Lloyd Koch and Patricia Halliburton. He grew up in Tivoli Gardens, a government housing scheme in West Kingston that had turned into a hardcore garrison. His father, Lester, was already feared and respected under the street name Jim Brown. This was not a regular family. Jim Brown was not just any hustler. He was the founder of the Shower Posse, a violent drug crew. That kind of money and bloodshed meant the Koch children did not grow up like most inner-city kids. Because of their father's drug profits, Christopher and his siblings moved through wealth in the middle of poverty. They lived in comfort while the blocks around them struggled, and they went to elite private schools with the children of political big shots. For Christopher, that meant heading to Ardennes High School, sitting in class with kids whose parents ran parts of the country, while his own father ran a different kind of empire just outside the gate. To understand Dudus, you have to understand who Jim Brown really was on the street. Lester Jim Brown Koch was more than a local bad man. He became the chief political enforcer for the Jamaica Labor Party in West Kingston after the earlier area leader, Claude Massup, was killed in a shootout with police in February 1979. Out of Tivoli Gardens, Jim Brown helped build the Shower Posse around 1981. The crew's home base was Tivoli, but their reach spread far beyond. With co-founder Vivian Blake, Jim Brown oversaw the distribution of huge amounts of cocaine and marijuana through Jamaica and into the United States. The gang's name, Shower Posse, carried its own stories. Some people said it came from politicians promising to shower supporters with gifts. Others said it was because the crew showered their enemies with bullets. Another theory tied the name to the Jamaica Labor Party's shower election slogan, which answered the rival People's National Party's power slogan from the 1970s. Whatever version you believe, the message on the street was simple. This posse rained down trouble on whoever crossed them. The Shower Posse did not rise in a vacuum. In the background, Jamaican politics and the Cold War were twisting together. With help from the United States, Edward Seaga's Jamaica Labor Party beat Michael Manley's People's National Party in the 1980 general election, at a time when Manley was said to be close to Fidel Castro and Cuba. In return for that support, the JLP government launched a ganja eradication campaign. Fields of cannabis, which were a major cash crop for many Jamaicans, were cut down or sprayed with chemicals that also damaged legal crops. As that old herb economy was smashed, a new hustle opened up. Jamaica turned into a major transshipment point for cocaine from South America, heading to the United States. The Shower Posse jumped on that wave. With political links and armed muscle, they used the cocaine trade to stack serious money and influence. Reports have linked the JLP-aligned Shower Posse to material support from the CIA, arms, training, and transport to the United States for gangsters who backed the right party in the local political war. On the ground, that translated into a crew that was armed up, plugged in, and ready to push crack cocaine, marijuana, and stolen or illegally bought guns into new turf, using violence anytime they wanted to expand. Once the floodgates opened, the Shower Posse did not stay trapped in Kingston. Vivian Blake took the gang's game overseas. He set up operations in Toronto, building the first North American branch in the Canadian city. From there, cells popped up in Jamaican communities across the United States. The posse moved into New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Miami, and later into cities like Kansas City, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. According to a Metro-Dade police sergeant who investigated Jim Brown, Miami felt like their second main base after Kingston. In New Jersey, the Shower Posse became the first Jamaican gang to step out of New York City and plant its flag in towns like Newark, East Orange, Irvington, Camden, Atlantic City, Vineland, Trenton, and Bridgeton. Other posses and sets tried to test them. In Philadelphia and South Jersey, the Dog Posse challenged their control. One clash in August 1985 at a picnic in Oakland, New Jersey, turned into a wild gun battle, where elements of the Shower Posse and Spangler Posse went at it with the Dog Posse and Tel Aviv Posse. 3 people were killed, 9 were wounded, and police picked up 33 handguns from the scene. By the late 1980s, a federal grand jury in Miami had indicted 34 members of the Shower Posse, including Blake and Coke, along with New York bosses like Errol Hussing and Tony Bruce. Former member Charles Little Nut Miller later testified that he had been a political enforcer linked to the JLP and the CIA, and even said, "The United States made me what I am." That was the world young Christopher was watching, a crew that answered to politicians at home, tapped into American power abroad, and left bodies behind wherever they moved. By 1990, the United States Department of Justice had had enough. It indicted Lester Coke and other key Shower Posse figures, including Vivian Blake, on drug trafficking and murder charges. Jamaican authorities arrested them and held Jim Brown in the General Penitentiary in Kingston while extradition proceedings moved forward. 2 years after that arrest, he died in a mysterious prison fire. Officially, it was a fire in his cell, but the timing was impossible to ignore. He died while waiting to be sent to the United States to face charges. On top of that, his oldest son, Mark Yati Coke, who was set to follow in his footsteps, had already been shot and killed while riding his motorcycle. In a short span, the gang lost the founding Don and the heir who was supposed to step up next. That left Christopher, the adopted son, standing in a space no regular youth could handle. The Shower Posse still had money, soldiers, and international links, but its main voice was gone. Tivoli Gardens needed a new boss. Christopher was not just another son grieving. He was the one the crew turned to. Dudas had already been pulled into his father's inner circle and used as a trusted assistant. At 23, he effectively took over the gang and became the de facto authority in Tivoli Gardens. People in the community knew he was not just Jim Brown's boy anymore. He was the one calling the shots. Inside the garrison, that meant he was both the Don and the political gatekeeper. Outside, it meant that a man barely past his early 20s was now sitting on top of a network that had been blamed for more than 1,000 murders, tied into politics, and spread through several cities overseas. The throne his father left was not just a local corner, it was an entire system, and Christopher slipped into that seat. Dudus did not rule exactly like the old school Dons before him. His story fits into the deeper history of Donmanship in Jamaica. Dons are informal leaders who run low-income urban communities, usually while doing illegal business, and they often have strong links to one of the two main political parties. Jim Brown had been one of the first big Dons on the island, ruling Tivoli with JLP support and drug money. When Christopher took over, he kept the core of that system but shifted the way he moved. His connections to the drug trade still brought in serious income, but he also diversified. He set up legal businesses in construction, security, and entertainment. Those companies gave him more legit-looking money and made him less dependent on government contracts, but he did not cut his political ties. He stayed close to the JLP and used his companies to funnel funds back into Tivoli. At the same time, he maintained an informal policing and conflict resolution system inside the community. Residents did not just see him as a dealer, they saw him as a governor. National security forces often turned a blind eye to what he was doing. Part of that was political protection. Part of it was the belief that his rule kept some kind of peace in a place that otherwise would have constant gunfire. People called him the president, Presi, bossy, short man, and he was treated as more than just the Don of Tivoli Gardens. He had reach into other urban communities in Jamaica and even across the diaspora in London, Miami, New York, and Toronto. In the streets, he looked less like a wild gangster and more like a low-key CEO of a full criminal political machine. Under Dudus, Tivoli Gardens became a classic garrison town with one man at the top. He did not only collect from the block, he gave back in ways that built heavy loyalty. He distributed money to the poor, created jobs through his businesses, and supported community centers for children and adults. People went to him to help pay school fees, handle medical bills, and bury their dead. In a place where the state was weak or missing, he stepped in as the fixer. Disputes were brought to him, and he acted as mediator and judge. His word could end a beef or start one. The support was so strong that Jamaican police could not simply roll into Tivoli whenever they felt like it. Officers had to move carefully and often needed quiet approval from his organization before entering the area. For many residents, he was not just a boss, he was the only authority that got things done. That is why his base saw him less as a self-interested kingpin and more as a Robin Hood-style social bandit, a man breaking the law, but protecting his people in a way the official system never did. But while the lane bigged him up like a hero, the same gangster world that made his name was still eating away at his own bloodline. Coke's sister, known in one account as Mumpy, was killed in a shootout, and her husband was also shot and killed. Another source notes that one sister was fatally shot in 1987, and one brother died in 2004 in drug-related violence. Different details line up to show the same thing. The gunplay that kept their father in power also took pieces of the family away. Behind the nice uniforms and private school fees, there was always that mix of grief and fear. Christopher did not just watch his father live like a don. He was watching what this life cost. On the street, reputations are built in stories, not court files. Dudus' heroic image grew through talk and music rather than official photos or interviews. In Kingston's poor downtown areas, people passed around tales of his good deeds, how he helped families, how he protected the community, how he punished those who preyed on residents. After the United States filed its extradition request in 2009, a string of popular musicians dropped tracks that framed him as a hero, not a villain. This was not new in Jamaica. Reggae and dancehall artists had been praising dons for decades, turning area leaders into folk figures. Dons also became icons in street art, painted on walls alongside sports stars, reggae legends, politicians, and religious figures. But there was a rule. Those big murals only showed dons after they were dead. While a don was alive, you might see his name or a message of respect in graffiti, but not his face in full color. In a country where smartphones and social media were everywhere, controlling images became part of a don's power. For a long time, Dudus stayed almost invisible. There was no social media presence. His name was not used loudly. People called him the president or the one who runs things in Tivoli instead of saying Dudas out in the open. That mix of no photos, whispered name, and big influence across Jamaica and the diaspora gave him an almost untouchable aura, like a boss you heard about everywhere but never quite saw. When the United States asked for him in summer 2009, that started to change. Local newspapers began using an older black and white photo of him as a child to talk about the star student who became head of a crime syndicate. Another favorite image was of him in his 20s or 30s, holding a beer, looking relaxed, but clearly in control. There was still no formal mugshot or official portrait being pushed by the state, but that casual photo helped build his persona as a cool, masculine leader. His ability to limit the circulation of his image, even while that one picture spread, reinforced the sense that he could control not just people and guns, but also how and when his face appeared. That year, American authorities formally asked the Jamaican government to extradite Christopher Coke to New York on drug trafficking and gun charges. They said evidence, including eavesdropping, showed he was running the Shower Posse's operations, moving cannabis and crack cocaine and shipping firearms back to Jamaica. This was not just a regular extradition. Coke's links to the Jamaica Labor Party were deep and well known, and Tivoli Gardens sat inside the parliamentary district of the Prime Minister himself, Bruce Golding. When the request came in, Golding did not sign it right away. He pushed back, arguing that the United States had used warrantless wiretaps to build his case, and that this broke Jamaican law. On paper, it was a legal argument. On the street, many people saw it as the government trying to shield a politically connected don. As weeks turned into months, pressure built. The United States kept pushing. Jamaican civil society and the opposition People's National Party began to openly accuse the government of protecting Coke. The longer the extradition was delayed, the more obvious it was that this one man had both Washington and Kingston tied up in a dangerous standoff. The pressure around Coke did not just stay in court documents, it leaked into Parliament and the media. In March 2010, an opposition member, Dr. Peter Phillips, raised questions about a deal between the Jamaican government and a United States law firm called Menace, Phelps and Phillips. The claim was that they were hired to lobby on a treaty dispute sparked by the refusal to sign the extradition request for Coke. The Golding administration insisted the firm was not acting for the government, even as filings under the Foreign Agents Registration Act in the U.S. showed a contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. In May 2010, Golding admitted he had sanctioned an initiative to lobby the United States, but said it was on behalf of the Jamaica Labor Party, not the government itself. After that shock, calls for him to step down exploded. Church groups, civil society, and the opposition demanded his resignation. In a televised address on May 17, 2010, Golding apologized for his role in the Menace affair and announced that the Attorney General and Minister of Justice would sign off on the extradition case against Coke. The very next day, Senator Tom Tavares Finson withdrew as Coke's lawyer to avoid a conflict of interest. On May 17th, the state finally issued a warrant for Coke's arrest. On the street, that move sent a clear signal. The state was finally stepping to the Don of Tivoli, and his base was not going to just lie down and take it. Once word spread that a warrant was out for Coke, his supporters moved fast. In Tivoli Gardens, men began erecting barricades at the entrances to the community. Old cars, metal, sandbags, and whatever else they could find were dragged into the streets. This went on for several days, while the security forces prepared for an operation to go in and serve the warrant. On May 23, 2010, the unrest jumped off. Gunmen linked to Coke launched preemptive attacks on the state. They hit 4 police stations in southwestern Kingston, looting and firebombing. One station was burned out. Later on, another station was set on fire and burned down. At the same time, gunmen in other parts of the city carried out attacks as a show of force. Tivoli supporters also staged a public protest in downtown Kingston's business district, pushing the message that the government was selling out their Don to foreign powers. In the eyes of the state, this was not just one man dodging arrest anymore. It was a full challenge to the government's control. The Jamaican government responded by placing Kingston under a state of emergency. On the night of May 24th and May 25th, they declared emergency powers in the capital and in St. Andrew Parish, set to last for a month while they hunted gunmen. Tivoli Gardens turned into a war-ready fortress. Inside the community, Coke's militia and allied thugs set up defensive lines as if they were a regular army. Molotov cocktail factories were put together. Ammunition and weapons were stockpiled in different corners. Electrified barbed wire was strung across main entrances, backed up with old burnt-out vehicles, sharp metal, and concrete slabs. Manholes were uncovered and filled with spikes. Roads were rigged with improvised explosive devices made from cooking gas cylinders, armed with electronic fuses and hidden wiring that ran back into nearby houses. Recon flights by Jamaica Defense Force helicopters picked up roadblocks made of sandbags, with 3 or 4 armed men at each point, holding AK-47s and Molotov cocktails. Snipers were spotted on rooftops, set up to pick off soldiers as they tried to break the lines. According to one colonel, the defensive work looked like something built by a serious militia. Ground reports said that when soldiers finally moved in, it took them 2 hours to advance 200 meters, a walk that usually takes 5 minutes. Tivoli was no longer just a poor housing scheme. It was a garrison-turned battlefield, built to hold off the state in the name of one man. On May 24, 2010, around 1,000 police and soldiers launched a large-scale operation in West Kingston. Their goal was clear: go into Tivoli Gardens, arrest Christopher Dudas Coke, tear down the blockades, and recover the illegal weapons believed to be hiding in the community. As they pushed in, they met fierce resistance. Cartel gunmen flooded the streets, moving through West Kingston, trading fire with the security forces and trapping civilians in their homes. Fighting in Tivoli spread to other volatile garrisons around Kingston as the operation went on. Over the next days, the death toll climbed. By May 27th, police said they had found the bodies of 73 civilians. 3 members of the security forces, 2 police officers and 1 soldier, were also reported dead. Hundreds of men were detained, with more than 500 in custody at one point, and more than 700 people processed across the week. Many of those detained had no address in Tivoli. The police believed they were gunmen from other parts of Jamaica who had come in to back Coke's militia. Official counts would later confirm at least 70 civilians killed and dozens more wounded. Residents, journalists, and human rights groups would describe the scene in Tivoli as appalling, with people stuck in houses without food or water, bodies in morgues, and families missing young men they never saw again. The state said it had no choice. For many Jamaicans, it looked like a war between 2 brutal forces, Dons and soldiers on one side, heavily armed soldiers and police on the other, with regular people crushed in between. As the smoke cleared, the question started. Human Rights Watch and local human rights advocates received credible reports that some of the more than 70 deaths in Tivoli were not killed in crossfire, but were executed. Witnesses said soldiers shot unarmed men at point-blank range. Residents claimed that some bodies were burnt or buried secretly, and that corpses were seen in coffins at May Pen Cemetery in disturbing conditions. The police commissioner publicly denied that the security forces had buried any bodies. He said some of the badly decomposed bodies had been moved from May Pen to a facility with enough cold storage to hold them until they could be identified. He also suggested that some of the dead might have been killed before the official operation began. Independent observers like the political ombudsman and the public defender visited the community and, at least in their early reports, expressed some satisfaction with conditions. But human rights groups were not convinced. Human Rights Watch called for a prompt, thorough, and impartial investigation into possible extrajudicial killings. They pointed to international standards that say security forces must use force carefully and respect the value of human life. For many Jamaicans, the big question hung over everything. Had the state gone into Tivoli to restore law, or to send a bloody message and clean up its own political mess by any means necessary? Even as the debate raged, searches continued. Day after day, the count of seized weapons and ammunition went up. By the end of May, security forces reported finding dozens of illegal guns and more than 10,000 rounds of ammunition in West Kingston. The haul included pistols, rifles, shotguns, submachine guns, Type 56 assault rifles, and ammunition for 7.62mm, 5.56mm, and 9mm weapons. They also recovered 19 grenades, 32 improvised explosive devices, and other explosives. Some of these were wired into the roadblocks, with remote control triggers leading back into homes, where operators sat ready to detonate them. In one case, a man posted at a remote device point was killed by a sniper before he could trigger it. Slideshows and video from the operation showed men walking openly with firearms and using binoculars from high-rise buildings. Security forces also discovered a closed-circuit television system inside Coke's presidential click office, watching all the entrances into Tivoli, along with large amounts of local and foreign currency. The scale of the network and the level of preparation proved that this was not just a small neighborhood crew. It was a full-blown militia structure built around one Don. But for all the guns and bodies, one thing was still missing. Christopher Dudus Coke was nowhere to be found. In the days after the Tivoli incursion, rumors about Coke's whereabouts spread wildly. Some said he had fled the island. Others believed he was hiding in nearby communities like Denham Town or Jonestown. The police commissioner insisted they had intelligence that he was still in Jamaica, while the security forces kept sweeping through West Kingston and holding on to their new positions. Coke stayed out of sight. For the first time, the man who had spent years making sure he was seen only when he wanted to be was now hunted not just by local rivals, but by the full weight of the Jamaican state and the United States. The image of the untouchable Don was cracked, but not yet broken. Everybody knew the story would end with only a few options: death in a shootout, a deal, or a quiet surrender. The question was which one he would pick. When the guns finally went quiet in Tivoli Gardens, the war was not really over. In January 2011, the Jamaican public defender came out and said his office had already taken in more than 1,000 complaints about what the security forces had done inside the community. People were talking about so-called extrajudicial killings, meaning men shot down without any court case. Families told stories of soldiers kicking in doors, smashing up homes, looting, beating residents, and locking up whole groups of men with no real reason. It was not the first time Tivoli had seen something like this. In 2001, a clash left 27 people dead, including 2 from the security forces. In 1997, 3 women and 1 child were killed. Nobody was ever held for those bodies. Now, after the hunt for Christopher Dudus Coke, it felt like the same script again, only bigger and louder, with the whole world watching to see if Jamaica would really call out its own squad for crossing the line. Those complaints did not land in a clean system. Between 2000 and 2010, more than 2,220 fatal police shootings were reported across Jamaica, but only 2 officers were actually convicted. For people in the inner city, it sent a simple message: when the state pulls the trigger, nothing usually happens after. Tivoli Gardens was not just another garrison. It was the stronghold of the shower posse and the president, right in the seat of political power. So the stakes were different. If the state admitted that soldiers and police had executed residents there, it would not just be a bad shoot in some corner lane. It would mean the government's war to grab the Don, who once ran Tivoli like his own mini-state, had turned into a massacre. While the poor cried for justice, a lot of people in suits wanted the country to move on fast. But the court case in New York was just getting started, and that would drag every dirty thread into the open. While Tivoli tried to bury its dead, the Americans were tightening their case on the man they saw as one of the most dangerous traffickers in the world. Christopher Coke was now sitting in a U.S. federal lockup, fighting charges that tied him to a long-running racket moving ganja and crack from Kingston to places like New York and Miami. When he was finally captured, a new wave of images hit the media. One set of photos showed him in a rumpled shirt and jeans, being led by DEA agents, a chubby figure with a sheepish smile, looking small and powerless instead of like the Don of Tivoli. Another leaked image made even more noise, a mug shot of him in disguise, wearing a curly wig, glasses, and a plain hat, an outfit many rid as a woman's clothing. In that shot, he stared at the camera with a resigned look, fully aware of how the disguise and the capture had dragged down his cool, unseen myth and turned him into a punchline for some viewers. The man who had once been almost invisible was now frozen in photos he could not control. At first, Dudas pleaded not guilty. His lawyers pushed hard to block wiretap recordings that Jamaican authorities had given to the U.S. They argued those phone taps were illegal and should not be played in court, but the judge ruled against him, saying the tapes could go in. That decision was deadly for Presi. The Americans also lined up witnesses, including old lieutenants who were ready to flip. One former member, Charles Little Nut Miller, had already told earlier courts that Dons like Coke worked as political enforcers and had direct links into power. For the first time, the image of the untouchable Don from Tivoli was in real danger inside a system he could not control with soldiers, cash, or fear. In August 2011, the man who once walked Tivoli like a king stood in a New York courtroom and dropped his last big play. Christopher Dudus Coke changed his plea. He admitted to racketeering conspiracy and conspiracy to commit assault with a dangerous weapon in aid of racketeering. In simple words, he admitted running a criminal enterprise that trafficked large loads of marijuana and cocaine into the United States, and he admitted ordering violence in support of that business. When the judge asked him why, he said one line that echoed all the way back to West Kingston: "I'm pleading guilty because I am." He knew what was on the table. If he went to trial and lost, life in prison was waiting. The Don who once made the police ask permission to enter his turf decided to fold his hand before the jury ever sat down. Once the guilty plea was in, U.S. prosecutors took their time painting the full picture of who they believed Coke really was. They told the court he was not just some boss on a corner. For nearly 2 decades, he had been the head of the Shower, Posse, and his own clique. They said he oversaw trafficking of marijuana, cocaine, and firearms between Jamaica and cities across the U.S. He admitted in court, "I also ordered the purchase of firearms and the importation of those firearms into Jamaica in furtherance of this conspiracy." Prosecutors said his power came from fear. They described a small private army that showered enemies with bullets, a real top-shotter squad that patrolled Tivoli so heavily the area was basically closed off to Jamaican law enforcement. Court papers linked him to at least 5 murders, including one story where a rival who stole drugs was cut up with a chainsaw inside a jail the crew controlled. In the eyes of the U.S. attorney, this was not just a Don. This was a man who used terror as a business tool. The Americans also showed how Coke's reach went far beyond Tivoli's borders. From his base in Kingston, he controlled New York traffickers by using the same kind of pressure that ruled the garrison back home. Many of the men handling his drugs in the U.S. still had family living in Jamaica. Prosecutors told the judge that Coke's soldiers and his reputation for violence made those relatives into hostages without chains. If someone in New York lost product, thought about cheating, or talked to the police, they knew their mother, sister, or cousin back a yard could pay the price. In that way, the Shower Posse model of control, guns, loyalty, and fear crossed over into another country without the Don even needing a visa. Tivoli might have looked like one block on the map, but in the paperwork laid out in court, it was the nerve center of a transnational gang that moved weight and kept everybody in line with the same badman playbook. While all of this was being read into U.S. court records, Tivoli Gardens was still living with the ghost of Presi. For the poor in that concrete maze, Coke was not just a trafficker. He was the man who helped them when times were rough. His extradition had already shaken the entire political order. Tivoli was the seat of then Prime Minister Bruce Golding, and Coke was seen as a key figure in delivering votes for the Jamaica Labor Party. Even after the bloody incursion, many residents were shocked that he did not fight the U.S. case to the bitter end. His mother had just died, and some people whispered that grief had broken him. Others hoped he would sing like a bird in court, blow up the whole system, and call names. But in the end, he held his tongue about politics and kept that part of the code. That split picture followed him right into sentencing. On one side, there were letters from family members and supporters saying Coke was well-mannered, respectful, and generous. He himself sent a handwritten letter to the judge asking for mercy. He said, "I did a lot of charitable deeds and social services to help members of my community. I also host a lot of charity events, such as an Easter treat for the elderly persons in my community." On the other side, prosecutors laid out documents and testimony showing a ruthless enforcer who terrorized and destroyed anyone who interfered with his drug operation. Women abused by his gang in Jamaica begged the judge to give him hard time. Witnesses described him walking into the Shower Posse's own jail and personally cutting up rivals with a chainsaw. In Jamaica's ghettos, Dons are often seen as social bandits, but in that New York courtroom, the scales were weighing a very different kind of ledger. Coke's lawyers tried to build whatever protection they could around him as the clock ticked towards sentencing. Judge Robert Patterson postponed the final decision several times, giving both sides space to gather more material. The defense leaned into the good Don image. The prosecution kept pushing back. The Jamaican government even handed over records of at least 50,000 intercepted calls dating back to 2004. For a man who had once made sure pictures of him barely circulated, his own voice was now evidence. The only question left was how long the system would lock away the man who had once made police think twice before driving past his zinc fences. On the 8th of June 2012, the sentence finally dropped. Christopher Dudus Coke was handed a total of 23 years in a U.S. federal prison. The judge broke it into 2 parts, 20 years on the racketeering count and another 3 years for conspiracy to commit assault with a dangerous weapon. He also ordered Coke to pay $1.5 million in forfeiture, money stripped from the profits of his trafficking operation that had stretched from Kingston to Miami to New York. U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara said that with this conviction, Coke could no longer traffic drugs in the U.S., move guns across our border, or terrorize people, and called it a final chapter in a very ugly piece of criminal history. For almost 20 years, coke had been listed as one of the world's most dangerous drug traffickers. Now the same system he had dodged for so long had pinned him down with cold numbers and a release date set far in the future. In court that day, the man the streets called Bossy did not cry or shout. Dressed in gray prison clothes, he sat still and tried one last time to remind the judge that he was more than the monster painted in the indictment. He told the court, "I am a good person." But the judge listened to the other side too, the way coke's power created a whole state within a state. In the end, the maximum sentence stuck. His lawyer said he believed coke would be released in his 60s and then sent back to Jamaica. There would be no appeal. For a Don, accepting the time without snitching was one of the last ways to keep some kind of street code intact. Even as coke started serving his time, the political earthquake back in Jamaica kept shaking. The whole Dudus affair had exposed how tightly tied together politics, Dons, and garrison communities really were. Prime Minister Bruce Golding, who represented Tivoli Gardens in Parliament, many people believed he was protecting a powerful supporter. He eventually stepped down as Prime Minister, and his party took a heavy loss back in the 2011 elections, a defeat widely linked to his handling of the entire coke saga. After leaving office, Bruce Golding stayed quiet for a while, but in a later interview, he finally gave his own version of what went wrong. He said that during the Tivoli operation, he got daily reports from the security forces, but that none of those reports admitted any unlawful or extrajudicial behavior. At the same time, he walked through the community and heard stories that were very different. He spoke about visiting a mother who said her two sons had been forced to kneel down in a room before they were shot. Golding admitted that some of those killed were clearly not gunmen engaging soldiers. When he was asked about coke's power, he said the Don had serious influence among young, unemployed men, not only in Tivoli, but across other areas. He also revealed that he had cut off contact with coke after 2007, when police found wanted men hiding in West Kingston despite his warning. "I felt betrayed," he said, explaining that he had tried to protect the residents while the Don was still sheltering outside gunmen in the community. Golding also gave a rare inside look at just how much pressure came from the US side. He said Jamaica had argued again and again that the original extradition request was based on evidence gathered in a way that broke the island's own laws. Under Jamaica's system, he explained, tapping someone's phone is only allowed if a judge signs off first. He claimed the US was stone deaf to those complaints, refusing to submit a new request that fit Jamaica's rules and insisting on one bottom line: let us have coke. Golding said he felt this was bullying a small country, but admitted that the crisis around coke's case left him with no real way out. The longer he fought, the more people believed he was just protecting a party-linked Don instead of defending the Constitution. He also pointed out that if Jamaica pushed for things like decriminalizing marijuana, the US could decertify the island in the drug war, cutting off aid and making it harder to borrow money. In that way, the battle over one Don sat inside a much bigger game of power. Years later, when the Commission of Inquiry into the Western Kingston operation finally sat, the Tivoli story was retold in brutal detail. The hearing started in December 2014 and stretched over 9 sessions, calling 94 witnesses. The commissioners wrote a report close to 900 pages long. It read at times like a war movie script. On one side were hundreds of gunmen, pulled in from across the island, setting up rooftop positions, building sandbag barricades, and rigging gas cylinders as bombs to defend their Don. On the other side were 800 soldiers and 370 police, using what the report called weapons of war to punch their way into the community. Residents testified that an officer yelled at them to clear the streets because all hell is going to break loose. The inquiry described the operation as one of the most serious human rights disasters in the English-speaking Caribbean in recent times, and finally forced the state to sit in a public room and listen. The commission did not only take police statements, it gave the mic to people who had crouched behind zinc while the shooting went on. A police sergeant told the panel he had seen about 14 or 15 officers lying flat at an intersection trying to get cover while warheads snapped through tree branches above them. He remembered a female officer wetting herself in fear and passing out. Then came the residents. One mother said she heard her son Fernando shouting, "Mummy, Mummy, they killed Pooksy," after hearing shots. Moments later, she heard him cry, "Mummy, Mummy, they gwine kill me," and more gunfire. She said she later saw police drag her son's body onto a big white truck. The commission listed these accounts alongside stories of snipers, homemade bombs, and armed men in the high-rises. It showed the public that Tivoli was not a simple tale of soldiers versus gangsters. It was a cramped battlefield where regular people were trapped between a Don's militia and a state that came in like it was invading enemy territory. While the courts and commissions were working, the streets were adjusting to a new kind of game. The coke case made it obvious that the old deal between big Dons and big politicians had backfired. The same garrisons built and fortified by parties like the JLP and PNP to lock in votes had grown so strong they were now threatening the state that created them. Politicians on both sides started talking about stepping away from Dons and refusing to use area leaders as their ground soldiers. The phrase Don Man politics suddenly sounded dangerous, not useful, but people who knew how Jamaica really worked warned that talk alone was not enough. A senior JLP figure admitted that many politicians had stayed in power for decades because of the Don system and said it was hard to break that umbilical cord. The coke episode had shaken the old order, but it was not yet clear if it had killed it. The fall of Presi and the heat that followed also sent a message to traffickers. Coke's big profile, his personality cult, and his status as a kind of ghetto celebrity had helped make him a target. After he was sentenced, many other players decided they did not want that kind of spotlight. Jamaican criminal groups began to splinter into smaller, quieter crews. They used the same experience and contacts built under big pauses, like the shower, but now they tried to keep their names out of the news and their faces off the walls. Investigations like the 2013 U.S. probe called Operation Next Day Air showed how new networks moved cocaine from Jamaica to New Jersey and California without flying one big Don flag. The Caribbean as a region became more important again as a lane for U.S.-bound coke, with seizures jumping in islands like Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic also playing their part. The trade did not die with coke. It changed shape, got lower to the ground, and tried to stay out of the kind of trouble that had sent Presi to a foreign cell. Back in Tivoli Gardens and the nearby garrisons, coke's absence left a hole no single man could fill. After his arrest and extradition, murders in Jamaica dropped sharply for a while. The number of homicides fell by about 1/3 between 2009 and 2011, which many people linked to mass arrests made under the state of emergency and the shock of the Tivoli operation. But that calm did not last. By 2013, the murder numbers began to creep up again. Inside West Kingston, different gangs and young bad men started to fight over who would become the new area leader. Reports said at least 4 different groups were trying to claim pieces of the old Shower Posse's turf. Some residents even found themselves looking back at the coke years with a twisted kind of nostalgia. As one market trader put it, Dudus may have done some bad things, but he kept order. Now you don't know who these bad men on the street are, and they are out of control. In more recent years, police attention has turned to a newer crew rising right, where coke once reigned. This outfit is known as the Tivoli Next Generation Gang. It is based in the same West Kingston stronghold that used to be Shower Posse ground. Top officers say the gang has been growing its influence, and there are reports that several members of the Coke family are involved. What nobody can answer for sure is whether Christopher Coke himself still holds any strings from inside his U.S. cell. A senior police official said that from his time working in the West, he could only speak to the clear influence of the Tivoli Next Generation Gang. "We are still seeing activities from the gang," he said, but admitted he did not know if there was any direct connection to Presi behind bars. For now, it looks like the street crown in Tivoli has passed to a new next generation squad that knows the old playbook but wants its own name. Even as new gunmen write their own script in Kingston, the original president is still sitting in U.S. federal custody, counting down his years. Coke is held at the Federal Correctional Institution at Fort Dix in New Jersey. For a long time, his release date was set for 2030, but under the First Step Act, a U.S. law passed in 2018 to reward good behavior and rehabilitation, some inmates can earn time off their sentences. Earlier this year, the U.S. Bureau of Prisons confirmed that Christopher Dudas Coke has had about 17 months shaved from his term. His projected release date has now moved up to the 25th of January 2029. Officials say more reductions are possible for prisoners who complete certain programs, but they have not said exactly how much credit Coke has earned or for what. What they have made clear is that he is still on track to be deported to Jamaica when his time is up. That raises the question everyone in West Kingston and beyond is quietly asking, what kind of welcome, if any, will be waiting for the former Don when he finally touches back down on his old soil? Even before that day comes, Coke's legend has refused to fade. His life and the Shower Posse's bloody history have already been turned into stories for people far outside Jamaica. The award-winning novel, A Brief History of 7 Killings, by Marlon James, used a fictional posse called Storm Posse in a place much like Tivoli Gardens, clearly echoing the real crew. Back in 2018, Netflix released a Drug Lords episode focused on Christopher Coke and his gang, turning the tale of Tivoli, the Don, and the U.S. chase into streaming true crime. Jamaica is still trying to deal with the real bodies and real trauma left behind. Former lieutenants like Harry Dog McLeod have been killed on the streets. New gangs have stepped into old lanes. And somewhere in a low-security U.S. prison, Presi is watching the clock and the calendar, while the island he left behind keeps trying and often failing to step out of the shadow of the Don system he once ruled. In the end, Christopher Dudus Koch went from Tivoli's bossy to a federal number sitting in a New Jersey cell, while other youths hustle on the same corners he once locked down. The same drug war that made his father Jim Brown rich and turned him into a legend also chewed up his bloodline and his freedom, turning private school uniforms and Don swagger into a tight mix of grief, fear, and ghosts that never really left. Tivoli got its so-called peace, but it came with bodies in the lane, mothers crying over sons, and a whole community caught between soldiers in uniform and gunmen in mesh marina. The politicians moved on, the headlines moved on, but the people in the garrison still live with the scars. So when you look at Dudas' story now, what do you really see? A cold-blooded kingpin, or a Robin Hood who played with fire too long? Or was he just another youth trapped in his father's playbook? Do you think the Jamaican state was any better than the Don system it helped build? If he walks out in his 60s, should a man like that ever get a second shot at power? And in a place like Tivoli Gardens, who would you trust more? The government or the next man the lane decides to call boss? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.